Good day. Welcome to the Vandy Sports Roundtable Edition podcast. This is a special Thanksgiving edition. I'm thankful I've got Billy Derrick, Luke Wyatt, Joey Dwyer with us. I don't think we've had a four-man show with the four of us all in at once, so I'm sure this will be a treat. We will talk football, we'll talk basketball, we'll take your mailbag questions, we'll do whatever we need to do here. First, a reminder, basketball season, and the Commodores are 6-1 after falling to Drake, but also winning over Nevada and Seton Hall. Anyway, that is presented by the Wash House. Are you dreading laundry day? Is it stealing time from the things that you truly enjoy? Let the laundry professionals at the Wash House take care of that for you. With two convenient locations in the greater Nashville area, just drop off your dirty laundry. Our professional attendants can give you back the one thing you can never have enough of. That is your time. Within 24 hours, you can pick up your nicely folded, fresh, clean laundry ready to be put away. Check out washhouseclean.com. Stop in today. Get your time back. Wish my good buddy Steve Andrews a happy Thanksgiving. Big Vandy fan, big supporter of our show. He is the guy that helps make a lot of this possible. Speaking of which, baseball season in your ice cream freezer also presented by the Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company. It is a family-owned third-generation milk and ice cream distribution company located in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. A partnership began over 50 years ago with Purity Dairy in Nashville to provide Purity milk and ice cream to consumers in Middle Tennessee, as they now serve Southern Kentucky, Northern Alabama, Chattanooga, and North Georgia. Today they supply grocery stores, convenience stores, and others with Purity products, as well as Mayfield, Nestle, Haagen-Dazs, ice cream. We love our ice cream here at the Vandy Sports Podcast. The folks at Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company can help you get yours. For more information, visit their website at mpmci.com. Football season, sponsored by nobody. Maybe we can fix that for next year. If you're interested, email me, chrislee70@gmail.com. How did nobody sponsor football season, guys? 6-5 heading into the Tennessee game. I guess let's start there. Luke Wyatt, I'll start with this. LSU game last week, not a bad performance. I think we all wondered coming in what LSU team would show up. That, to me, looked like an LSU team that was ready to play. I thought that with Vanderbilt threw that touchdown pass on the first offensive snap, that would tell us a lot. LSU could fold the tent and go home. No, instead, LSU played pretty hard. It was a competitive game. LSU's athletes, I thought, just too much for Vanderbilt to handle. What were your takes from that game and maybe anything meaningful going into Saturday, Luke?
Well, I think you're still seeing a Vanderbilt team that's pretty beat up. And I know everyone says that after 11 weeks or 12 weeks that you're going to be beat up. But I think in our situation, we always talk about Vanderbilt's lack of depth. It's still there. It's better than it was, obviously, in Clark's first few years, but we're still, when we have to substitute, there is still a drop-off. And I think since the Texas game, guys, that we've seen a gradual effect the season on us. Been a lot of emotional roller coasters, and we talked about the schedule. It's been incredibly difficult, and I just think the LSU game was another one of those games where defensively we kind of caught and held on a little bit. We didn't bring the fight to them defensively, I didn't think. But, again, a one-score game. We were right there at the end, and then they call it the clap on C.J. Taylor. But I just worry that physically we're pretty beat up, and I just don't – we got a lot of guys out there playing, but they're playing at 60 and 70.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, you go back to the Alabama game. This is a lot different looking team and that's you can say that for a lot of teams, but I think since the Alabama game, and into Kentucky, I think Joe and I were there. We knew Pavi was not 100%, and even Georgia State, Joey, right? I mean, there's been very few games where Pavi is full go, full health this year. I think that has a lot to do with the team. But Luke, I like how you said that, that was a one possession game late. I mean, I don't think many people thought Vanderbilt would have inched right back into that game. And, whether it was a garbage time touchdown or not, what are they, 6-0 against the spread, I think. And that says something about this team. And so again, I'm talking about beating spreads here, but I do think that, we haven't always been able to say that about Vanderbilt football teams, Chris, where, I mean, just look at last year. I mean, they got clobbered at South Carolina. They still lost South Carolina this year, but the margins are drastically different. So I think that's what you look at. But Joey and I have talked about it a lot. This team is gassed, it feels like. Do they have enough in the tank is a common question right now.
Billy, you and I were having this conversation, I think, the other day. And the thing that I said is, to me, maybe more surprising than them having 6 wins is the fact that their worst loss this year, I mean, throughout South Carolina, that was 21 points. Other than that, they've not lost a game by more than 7 points. That is something that I said before the season. Like, I don't know what kind of record we can judge them on because the schedule looked bowl prohibitive. Remarkably, they have gotten bowl eligible. But I just thought, like, man, the wear and tear of having to play Alabama, Texas, LSU, Tennessee, Kentucky, which I thought would be better than it was, Virginia Tech, I just thought there's no way. I mean, I think I've said this before the season, but it bears repeating. The computer models had them losing their games this year by like a combined 200-something points. They are, I don't know, plus 40-something, plus 50-something, wherever they are coming into the Tennessee game. I mean, as I said, they had to be a lot better to be a little bit better in a way that it mattered, and they have been. Now, I think what you said is true. I think when you hold them up to a mirror against some teams they played lightly, does their offensive line compare to LSU, to Texas? I mean, no, there's a glaring difference there. Do their running backs compare to those teams? No, there's a glaring difference there. Does their defensive line compare to those teams? No, very different. Now, I think where they are, I think their safeties, they've gotten really good play there. I think their receivers have been a little better than we thought, and then there's Diego Pavia. But I think they have schemed this thing up. I think people have kind of figured that out. You look at their scoring over the second half of the season, it's gone way down. But this was a plan that was, I think, gave them the absolute best chance to compete. And I think this staff, the only bone that you can really pick is probably that Georgia State game. But that also showed you the thin line of margin that they have, that they're good enough to beat Alabama, but they also are not talented enough to where they could lose to Georgia State. I think the staff has wrung just about every ounce of talent out of this team. And regardless of how Saturday goes, they did a terrific job. Joey, we'll let you speak for a minute because we've kept you in the deep freeze for 8 minutes here.
Yeah, I do wonder if there's anything left in the tank for them, and I think that's my big question moving forward. I think the scheme is a pretty important piece of this. A lot of the season they've been able to avoid kind of body on body, and that being what defines the game. And I think in the LSU game, you saw a lot of, well, LSU's got a better receiver, so they're going to win this matchup because Vanderbilt was not able to out-scheme them in that way. And you feel it with the offensive line too. I don't know that that's ever been a great offensive line, but I think their scheme really helped them look like a great offensive line. And they've played really good football at times, but I just look at it, and when you're playing a team like LSU and you've got to go one-on-one and you don't have a schematic advantage anymore, I think it's pretty difficult to beat a team like that. And that's another reason why I wonder if they have enough in the tank, especially when they're banged up. I think they're going to have a hard time winning one-on-ones. And I don't know that I'm as fundamentally sound or I guess technically sound as people or other people are, but it just feels like they don't have the schematic advantage offensively anymore. And I think that's been really difficult on them. They haven't been able to run it. Cedric Alexander averaged 2.7 yards a carry against LSU. And really the last couple of weeks hasn't been super effective. I think a lot of that's attributed to him being banged up as well. Pavi's been really their only effective rushing threat, and I think that's really hurt them. Eli Stowers hasn't been able to get involved, and I think Vanderbilt's going to have to beat some teams if they're going to beat Tennessee or whoever they play in the bowl game by throwing it down the field and playing a different game than they've played throughout the entire year, Chris. And I think that's an area of concern for me is they're just going to have to be different to beat a team like Tennessee. And even if things are working, I just wonder if they have enough in the tank to go and beat a team like Tennessee, especially with how banged up their skill guys on offense are.
Well, Let me say this about the offensive line. We talked about this. I was watching a lot of the other teams. They play 8 and 9 offensive linemen. Vanderbilt's pretty much played 6 the entire year. That's a lot more plays on those guys' legs. And again, we've got to get better depth-wise. I do think that through the portal, our offensive line got much better than last year, but we still have to take one more step to get to where when we get to game 10, 11, and 12, we still got enough gas in the tank like we're talking about.
Luke, I want to hit on something there. I was doing the research. You compare a typical Vanderbilt and Tennessee game. Tennessee has almost 18 plays more a game in its games than Vanderbilt. That's like a half quarter of football. That's something that the staff, and part of that is like not turning the ball over. They're number 2 in the country in fewest turnovers, tied for second, and they're number 1 now in special teams at SP+. They found a very narrow path to put this together, and again, they have executed it to perfection. I think part of it was knowing, hey, in this era of tempo where people throw you off, fewer plays is better for us, and that's another thing that I just think points to how well the plan was drawn up and has been executed.
Yeah, there's 3 things. 3 things we have to do every game to win: limit penalties, win the turnover battle, and win time of possession by 10 minutes plus.
Yeah.
And when they execute that puts pressure on the other team. We've seen it. Alabama, they just sort of melted under that formula for Vanderbilt. And when's the last time we saw that? Because you go back to Auburn, that was an ugly, ugly win. That if Auburn has any semblance of an offense that can take care of the football, they probably win that game. So, but I think Vanderbilt kind of willed that formula in that game. But that probably, if you ask a lot of people, that wasn't the full formula for them to win the game. Can they do it one more time? I mean, and in the bowl game too. But do they have enough in the tank here against a really good top 10 team in the country right now, a playoff team? We'll see. But that's the question. Can they execute that formula for one more regular season game?
I think Tim Beck's got a lot to prove on Saturday, and he's proven a lot throughout the course of the year. But can he put in another wrinkle, Chris, that gets them over the edge here? Can he put together enough good drives of play calling to be able to go and beat Tennessee? I think he's got a lot to prove this weekend, and he might get a head coaching job even if they stink it up.
Yeah.
But, it's interesting just to think about, like, his base stuff early in the year was working. Now he's kind of been thrown a curveball, and can Tim Beck and Jerry Kill kind of find a solution? I don't think that tells you that they're not effective or anything if it doesn't work, but I think if they're able to find a way to scheme them into a win here, that's a huge testament to what they can do.
Yeah, I don't know how much schematically has been taken away from them, but it feels like some of the bells and whistles to the offense that we saw earlier in the year, Eli Stowers throwing the ball, shovel passes, the option left where you've got a receiver hugging the sideline, a half step behind Pavia where there's he can get past the line of scrimmage and make a throw over there, past the line of scrimmage because it's a running play. It feels like, Luke, a lot of that stuff that they did early that brought them some big plays we haven't seen in a while. I don't know the reason why. And when we get Clark Lee at press conferences, his message has been pretty consistent. I leave the offense to those guys, but it's been something to watch. I feel like we're going to have to see some of that for them to beat Tennessee. I also wonder what Nate Johnson's role is because we saw more Nate than we've seen in a while. I don't know what your options are with both Johnson and Pavia in the game at the same time. I think I'd be thinking really hard about that. Maybe you get Nate an end around 3 or 4 times. He is, with the ball in his hands, the fastest guy on the team. That's a lot of stuff I said there, but I think somewhere in that universe of other things is a place that they're going to have to maybe live if they want to upset Tennessee on Saturday.
Yeah, and I want to throw something out there that's, and I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theory or nothing, but let's think about this, guys. If for some reason we upset Tennessee, the SEC may only get 2 teams. It gives everybody else 3 losses. So if it's a close football game late, I've been there, I've lived it. The conference, it's millions of dollars, millions. So we're going to have to win the game and win it kind of decisively, in my opinion, by a couple of scores if we're going to beat them, because I know how the league works, and it works that way, unfortunately.
Well, that means it'll get interesting late if it's close.
Flag coming out behind the play, holding.
Well, you can thank the Big Ten run playoff committee for putting this when it released the first poll, and if you said, all right, the first 5 teams are all from one conference, I'm like, okay, I can buy that. The SEC's that good. No, it's a Big Ten. I feel like the flag got planted weeks ago on that. I don't think the commissioner, I just don't think a Big Ten AD, I don't think an SEC AD should be running the committee. It just breeds this kind of talk fairly or unfairly. But I do think that was maybe there's some dominoes that fall from there, unfortunately. That I don't like, and their process. I know we're getting off tangent. Their process and their reasoning is just, it feels like they have decided what it is they want to do, and then they backfit their explanation.
Yes. But the pressure is an interesting discussion, because how much pressure could there, if it is a close game late, does the pressure affect Tennessee? Or because the fan base, look, it's probably going to be 70-75% Tennessee fans. That's obviously a disadvantage for Vanderbilt. When Florida knocked off Ole Miss, Florida was at home in front of, I don't even know how many fans at the Swamp. It was a sold-out crowd. Same thing with Alabama at Oklahoma. That was majority Oklahoma. Is that what ends up hurting Vanderbilt potentially? Does the Tennessee crowd favor them and kind of push them to the finish line, or can Vanderbilt rip through that? They did it against Alabama. They almost did it against Texas. So that is something I'm interested in. And how does the crowd play into this, and how does that affect the pressure that's on Tennessee? Or do they not feel it as much?
I want to bring something up, and Luke, you tell me. One thing that the stadium being reduced by 10,000 seats is sort of masked, because when you're in a place, you look for, all right, what's the percentage breakdown of fans, Vanderbilt's versus other teams? It's wild. I think in the most successful season we've seen in a while, have there ever been fewer actual Vanderbilt fans in the building for the season than we've seen this year?
No, not when you had a successful year, because.
But even throwing that aside,
right?
I mean, but now that you've shrunk 10,000 more fans out of that place, what you should have done is make sure you get 27,000 of your people in the building, which they used to be able to, used to be when the stadium was 40,000 people. And they put 28,000 of their fans in there. Remember how mad James Franklin got that Wake Forest game? We had 32-33. And it was all Vandy fans. You haven't seen them fill the place with their own fans. And now, but because the optics are different, because you've cut so many seats off. But if you get down to a number of fans, and you're seeing it for basketball too, the fan base is just tiny now. And that is something they're going to have to work on between now in the off season.
Well, it's because of that 5 to 7 year lull in athletics period.
Yep.
The care factor was out the window. And Joey, I don't know how much you noticed that in the last 5 to 7 years and how close you follow that. But at my time at Vanderbilt, and I go way back pre-Titans, pre-Predators, even when we weren't winning games, we'd still have 75% of the fans were ours. In football and basketball, even more so. It's something that, as a marketing guy, I'm sure it's a nightmare, but they've done nothing to cultivate new fan members. And what your guest said the other day, I really loved what he said when he's talking about the T-shirt crowd. Vanderbilt doesn't have a T-shirt crowd. They need that.
Yeah. I think CJ Taylor summed it up well yesterday when he was talking. He said he grew up seeing a lot more orange than black and gold just about everywhere. And that's a Vanderbilt player. And I think it's been that way for a long time, right? I don't think that Vanderbilt has any sort of stronghold, even in Nashville at this point. And I think that's a real problem that they've got to address. And you guys probably have better answers for me as to why that is and how they can fix that. But I know it's a thing, and I think you're going to see that on Saturday. I will say, though, Vanderbilt's playing with house money this weekend, and I think they're in a pretty good spot. You come in, and nobody's expecting you to win. You're going to be in a place that I think is going to be kind of against you, but I think this team has kind of embraced that to this point, and they embraced it against Virginia Tech. They embraced it against Alabama, and I think that's something to note. And man, they got a chance to play spoiler and ruin their in-state rival season. That's probably a pretty desirable spot for them at this point, Chris.
Yeah, and to that, I ran into to Luke's point. I ran into a friend of mine that I hadn't seen in, I don't know, at least probably a decade, maybe more yesterday. Big Vandy fan, grew up in the stands, still had season tickets. And the topic shifted to basketball. He said, like, man, I used to not miss a game. It's like I turn on, like, who are, and some of it, like, is just basketball. Like, this has nothing to do with Vanderbilt. Like, he says, I turn on the TV and who are these guys? But I think, those dynamics in sports that have chased some older fans away and combined with just all the losing have really sort of taken a toll. And they've got to have a plan to get that back. It's sad to walk into Memorial. We'll get to that in a minute and see, what was there for the opener, Joey? Maybe 4,000 people, maybe
Certainly
5.
was not crowded.
Yeah, and a lot of
It was
people were
worse
like,
than I thought.
as soon as we get rid of Stack, we'll move. There might have been a few hundred people that came back, but the number of fans is just so small that even with more people coming back, they're just fewer to draw from in the first place.
I think the crowd that was there was louder, but it certainly wasn't as much as I thought, Billy.
Yeah, and I go back to the basketball season a couple of years ago. Stack's, I guess, 4th year. Joey, that I guess was your first year on the beat. I was at the Auburn and Mississippi State games, and those were great games. And that was a good Vanderbilt basketball team. Maybe should have made the tournament. They were, 7, 8 straight, was it, Joey? So, but even then, Auburn had 70% of the fans in there. Mississippi State, I think it was something, it was closer to 50-50. Like, I was thinking to myself, like, when is that going to change here? And again, you have to win. You have to cut through that. They did that against Alabama. Like I said, they almost did it against Texas. Can you do it again? I mean, they've shown that their mentality can cut through that. And I think that in a weird way that has been motivation for them to send most of the crowd at their home stadium back home. So it's going to be interesting.
One of the things I'll say about Memorial, I think, and Joey, you were there too in Charleston, the way the kids played for 2.5 games, actually, that style of play will bring people back to watch. If that's something that Vanderbilt hasn't had in probably since Eddie Fogler was here, where every play they're playing 100%, diving on the floor for loose balls. The Grant Huffman effect, what I call it, because that kid, he in Charleston, that kid was amazing. He and Tyler Tanner and some other guys, the double teams. I mean, that's just fun basketball to watch, and people will come see that, even if you're just a neutral observer.
Mm-hmm. I think Byington has been playing really hard at this point, and I think that was kind of his message to the introductory presser, is that you're going to see them play really hard, and I think that's been as promised to this point. I don't know if the ball movement has been or the unselfishness has been there all the time, especially not Sunday, but I will say if there's one thing they can hang their hat on, and it hasn't been that they're a great defensive team, it's that they want to defend and they're getting after it a little bit, like Grant Huffman. Tyler Tanner, I think, plays really hard, and I don't even know that he's a great defender, but I ran into somebody close to Tyler Tanner a couple of days ago, and they were even shocked that he's defending at the level that he is. And they've seen just about every game about that Tyler Tanner has played recently, and more than recently. So I think he has them dialed in defensively. I don't know that means they're ever going to be a good defensive team. I think they're a little limited size-wise, and that's the obvious point. But they're playing hard. They want to defend, and I think they're pretty disruptive. You saw that, I think, against Nevada. They forced like 17 to 20 turnovers, and they forced a lot of turnovers all weekend in Charleston. That was one of my main takeaways positively about them, is they're a scrappy group defensively who's going to be disruptive and play hard. And I think that's the first step to being a good defensive team, Chris.
Yeah, I thought, I mean, they've got some limitations. I'm not sure that they've got a dude, and I've been watching a lot of other SEC games. The league is, guys, the league is unbelievable this year. Like, you look at KenPom, and they are far and away the best conference. I think that's a first maybe. That's number one. I think number two, I'm interested to see, Joey, how they react from the Drake game, because you had to feel really good. Like, you're seeing, all right, there's limitations. Like, if everything goes well, they might sneak into Dayton or maybe a 10 or 11 seed if it all goes well and they stay healthy. And that feels like a little bit, I'm not going to say it's a stretch, because, you know, their situation underneath. But it's aggressive, I guess, is a good way to put it. It's out there. It's not impossible, but it might be just between the SEC schedule might be a tough ask. But it's out there for the taking as we're doing this near Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
How much did the Drake game dampen your optimism, or did it at all? I mean, maybe that's just a tough matchup. It's a unique defense. It's a uniquely old team. They didn't have as much turnaround time, I guess, to prepare for it. What, if anything, changed in your mind following that game?
I don't think anything necessarily changed. I think it was just that their flaws, in my mind, were a bit amplified. Their three-point shooting was pretty poor that game. They were really selfish with the ball, and I think that was one of the main takeaways from the night. Their front court was not good enough, and McLaughlin was hurt for the second half, and that's something. But they've got to get more out of Jalen Carey. He hadn't really given them as much as I thought he would, especially shooting the ball. I thought he had a chance to make a big shot against Drake and missed it from three. Really hasn't shot it well from out there. He's an X factor for them, and he's got to be better than he has been, and I'm sure he knows that. But I think the flaws were amplified, right? They were selfish. Their size even showed up a little bit in that game. Drake had like 47 points in the paint and out-rebounded Vanderbilt by 17. I think you leave the weekend feeling pretty good, though. The resume got better. They beat a good Nevada team. They beat Seton Hall, who's one of the more physically imposing teams. I actually talked to Shaheen Holloway the next day and had a great quote about how he doesn't like anything that they do offensively. It was almost Stack-esque. So just want to bring that. That was a great moment. But I do think that I feel better about them coming out of the weekend than I did heading into the weekend. And excluding the Drake game, they looked like a tournament team for those first two games. Yeah. Now I think they come back to earth a little bit and they got to figure out kind of what they are. But Billy, they've got a lot going for them right now. I do think they have their built-in limitations, but with the style they play and the amount of vets they have and how hard they play, I think they've got a path to getting around those. The ceiling, I think, is the NCAA tournament, but I could also very easily see if they lose two more non-conference games, they're going to have an uphill path to that. I will say the rest of the non-conference schedule looks pretty light. Virginia Tech is a team that has really been decimated by not having NIL money. TCU, I don't think, is that great. I think they could realistically win the rest of their non-conference games. The law of averages would say they probably won't, but if they leave non-conference play with one or two losses, and I think that's a realistic thing, you also got to watch out for Austin Peay, who I think is a really good team, will probably be a tournament team. Other than that, though, they should breeze through the rest of non-conference play, and if they leave non-conference play with two losses, probably only got to get 8 in SEC play, Billy, and that really is a good sign.
Explosive, but streaky, I think are a couple of good words to describe this team. Where, I mean, you saw what they could do against Nevada, a tournament team, and then Seton Hall. But Drake comes to town, and they play as a team, and I think that, you know, maybe it was the third game in the tournament that wore them down a little bit. But I like how you mentioned the depth. I mean, you never know who's going to step up and score 20, 25 points. Nickel had 24 the other night. But he might have 4 the next night, but Edwards goes off for 18, and, or McLaughlin. There's a lot of different guys they can go to. You said they didn't have a dude, Chris. I think they make up for that in the sum of the parts. Collins. I mean, was it Nevada, Joey? He hit the 3-4 big threes. So if you can get that from Collins and get these guys to play more consistently. Carey, like you mentioned, has to be better than he was for the majority of that tournament. But I think I agree, Joe. The ceiling is the NCAA tournament, but I'll be interested to learn what the floor is. I think we might learn what the floor of this team is, as we get into SEC play.
I'm gonna put a thought out here, and then I'm gonna ask Joey a question. I look back to off-season roster construction. Mark Byington gets an A for what he did.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think they had a good start on NIL at all. He walked into that job. I'm not going to say late. I guess it's when everybody else did. I guess they got lucky that he didn't win another game and go to another weekend. That could have really set them back. But you look at what he did. He found he's got 3 guys on the roster. I guess, Joey, was Edwards the primary ball handler at North Texas last year, or did he play off the ball?
I think he mostly played off the ball.
Okay. Well, you still got Hogard, who's spent a ton of time is Michigan State's point guard. Grant Huffman did the same thing, had over 3,000 minutes at Davidson coming in. And Edwards, who can play on the ball. You got Tanner, who can run the point if needed. You got 4 guys who can run point guard. Now, again, is Edwards ideally a point guard? No, he's better off the ball, but he can do it. So you have that. You got some glue. You got a guy in McLaughlin I think was really underrated. You got a guy in Carey who can, as you guys pointed out, can give them more than he's gotten. Collins is a nice guy to have as a rotation piece. Like, I feel like they did a really good job. And Kijani Wright, when they signed him, I'm like, okay. High school All-American, didn't do much at Southern Cal, but you can see now what they lack and how he would have fit in. And I think he could have given them 400 to 600 minutes of quality ball because of a need. Like, you give them Wright, and I think that the roster takes another half step up because it fills a need. But that is my concern. You've lost a guy there that could have helped them where they need it, and now you got McLaughlin, who sat out, most of the second half of the last game against Drake. And boy, did that show when he was on the bench, Joey. What's the prognosis there? I don't know. We talked yesterday, and you didn't think it was serious, but do we know anything more about that?
No, Byington just said it was a tweak and didn't specify what the tweak was. I should have followed up on that, but I wanted to ask about him and Wade. When Byington's in the hallway, it's tough to keep him wrangled. He's like a 10-year-old kid just bouncing around, like ready to get out of there, especially when they lose. But I think they're going to be fine with McLaughlin. I'd expect him to play on Friday against Tennessee Tech. But I think you're right about Kijani Wright. I think he would have been a factor for them and would have taken some pressure off of Jalen Carey. I think people forget with the expectation level Byington has put on Carey that he's only a sophomore. And I think that's a real thing. Bigs normally take a leap their junior year. And Carey was at a mid-major last year as like the 8th man. There's a lot of pressure on him right now to be a good SEC big. And I think that's something that I look at and say maybe if they had Wright, I think Carey still would have played a lot, but you're not expecting him to be a bell cow low post guy. And he's had flashes of really good play. I think the opener was really impressive. I think he had a really nice move against Seton Hall. He does some things well, but I think you were kind of hoping that you'd have somebody to take a little bit of pressure off of him, and Kijani Wright would have been that. I do think Byington did a nice job building the roster. I think you're going to look at next offseason in the portal and say that's the window where you could get really excited about what they get. But, I mean, for year one with the NIL that he inherited, I mean, that was an excellent haul. And for them to even be in the conversation of being a tournament team is a huge thing. I heard somebody a couple of days talk about how he doesn't think that year one should be an excuse anymore in college basketball. I totally think it should be an excuse. I mean, having to rebuild a roster the way Mark Byington did is really difficult. And the way that staff put it together, I think, is a real indicator of positive success. I do think that high school, it might take a little bit longer. That's another conversation for another day. I do think their NIL is really capable, though, there. And I think Sebastian Williams-Adams from Auburn is a guy that they were in on and made more than a capable offer to. Jerry Easter, I think they made a pretty good offer to as well. That's something that could trend up. But, Billy, looking back at that offseason and them having a chance to compete this year, I mean, I think they had a heck of an offseason, and Byington did a great job.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the shape this basketball program was in. I know we don't like to talk much about it anymore, but look, this looks a lot different. Whether they make the tournament or not, I mean, the product on the floor looks eons different than what it was. And I think that's all Vanderbilt fans wanted and needed back in Memorial.
Well, I guess I worry, you talk about how many wins it will take. If they lose one, let's say they lose at TCU, beat Virginia Tech, I worry about a Tennessee Tech come Friday. They just lost to Georgia by 7. And I don't know if the big kid plays much, but they got a 7'2" kid inside. So I worry about games like that as well. And Austin Peay. They can't let one of those jump up and bite them, because if they do, then you're forced to probably go 9-9 in the SEC, and I'm not sure they can get to the 500 mark.
You mentioned Tennessee Tech, Luke. How about the basketball in the state of Tennessee right now?
Memphis looks like the best team in the state.
Man.
I don't know. I mean, Tennessee's really good too. Obviously, just blew Baylor's doors off the other night. But yeah, I mean, I think with them, like when it looks good, it looks pretty good, right? But it's the weirdest thing, because at times they play really smart and they play really hard, but then they'll have these lapses for a half against a Jackson State or somebody. And it kind of brings your expectation a little bit down to earth. I think if they can, I would think, Joey, I would think that the Drake game would be a great teaching tool, because that second half was just frustrating to watch. And give credit to Drake. They had a lot to do with it, but there was a lot of self-inflicted stuff there between that game and some other halves they've had where they just, you were kind of questioning what have they got. Again, they have played well more often than not, but I think there's enough there through 7 games that Mark Byington can show to his guys and say, look, guys, we got to cut this out if we want to be the basketball team that gets to the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, it was interesting to talk to Byington after. He wasn't as much angry as – I think there was almost a level of, like, as a teacher, I think there was almost a level of excitement in there. Like, now they can listen to me a little more and they can see the error in their ways. And I think you saw it in the second half. Jason Edwards, I thought at times tried to be a hero. I think a lot of guys did. He was the only double-figure scorer in that game. Hogarth, I think, tried to put it on his back a little too much, and that was something that he said post-game. He was like, man, our guys tried to be the hero at times, and that was a real thing that I think he can use his teaching tape now, and I think that is somewhat exciting to him that he has something to kind of stand on now and say, man, you guys got to get this in shape, because otherwise this is going to continue to happen. So it's going to be interesting to see how the ball moves, because I think it really moved against Seton Hall, and that was a really impressive thing. I thought their offense was really impressive in that game. The way what they were able to do against Nevada, who's the longest and biggest and most athletic team they've played, I think is really good. But I do think they've got a long ways to go, and they've got to get this group cohesive as a whole. I think Tyler Nickel not scoring on Sunday was a big thing, and I think if we were farther along in the season, you would have seen them get him more involved and get him more looks. He only had 2 or 3, and I don't know what happened to Tyler Nickel between Saturday and Sunday, but I think that's kind of a microcosm of them as a team, is like they're not going to have somebody consistently go off for 20, but somebody's going to be able to do it one night, and then the next night you might not be able to rely on them at all outside of maybe Hogarth. I'll go to Luke here. I think they have the benefit of balance, but I also don't know if they have a guy every night, like Chris said, that they can turn to and say, go get us 20. And I wonder if that's almost a curse in some senses.
It is, and we saw it in the Drake game with Edwards. Basically, he had 26, and if you're relying on a kid that's 6 foot, maybe 6'1", to get to be your go-to guy at the end of a shot clock, you're gonna have a lot of turnovers. You're gonna have the kid get blocked at the rim. Edwards is a really good offensive player. I mean, he's a scorer, no doubt, but he has to temper that with making the right decisions. He left several people open on the wing. You know, we talk about Tyler Nickel getting shots. There were several times when he was standing out there, could have beat a ham sandwich guarding him, and we're taking it in 2 and 3 guys in the paint. So there again, that was that selfish part of it. So yeah, I think Edwards is their best option to score, late in the game. But he's also, it's kind of a double-edged sword. He also can be a turnover machine at times.
The other thing that's kind of occurred to me in watching them is they're going to have some nights where they hit 12, 13 threes, but it's mostly going to be off volume and somebody like a Nickel having a hot night. Because if you made a list of like who are the top 23-point shooters in Vanderbilt basketball history, I mean, you can, man, they've had so many. John Jenkins, Scott Drouд, Barry Booker. I think we could name 20 guys before we name anybody on this team. And to me, that is a glaring weakness. I like what they've done with their offensive construct. And I think that, and I don't remember who articulated this, but the brand of their program had fallen enough to where when you're out there in the auction for players, so to speak, you get the same offer from Marquette. I'm just throwing a school out there. I don't know that they competed against Marquette on anybody, just for example. But like if your offer is the same that theirs is, the guy's going to go to Marquette because of where that brand is and where this brand is. So I think he did a good job. But when you're having to replace that many guys, you run up against it at some point. And I think that's one thing. If I had a fault to find, and look, I guess you could say Hemingway's the guy that could be that for them if he's healthy. So he did address it, and he probably went through the bargain bin. Joey, you and I had this conversation yesterday. People are kind of upset that Hemingway's not played more. Hemingway was a 10, 11, 12, 13 guy on the roster coming in. And those are the kind of gambles that you take at that point. You find somebody that he's got a tool that if it works and he's healthy, that you can plug in and use. You don't go out and throw that at a guy that just is kind of ordinary and doesn't have a carrying tool. So I think he did sort of address that in a practical way. And maybe he's got a role going forward. I don't know where they go with that, but that is one of the holes that I see in this roster is they don't have that 3-point shooter. Now I think he can recruit at this roster based on the way they play, but that guy's not there right now.
Yeah. Hemingway, I think, is an interesting case. Brandon tweeted a couple of days ago that there's some reason to worry about that maybe. Byington talked a couple of days ago about how he might have been able to go for Cal, and then when I asked him in Charleston, he said he's not sure about his status. That doesn't seem like a ringing endorsement that he's going to play on Friday or anytime soon. I think Hemingway is an interesting follow there. Just he does bring them something that they don't have a ton of. I think you look at it early in the year, and they couldn't make a shot to save their life. And we were talking about, well, it's going to average out, but averaging out for their careers means they're probably like a 33, 34% three-point shooting team. And I think that's a worry too. Chris, I think you brought up my age-old point of the Vanderbilt has not been good in 10 years tax in the portal. I think they're still dealing with that. As I alluded to with those two recruits, they're dealing with that as recently as like a week ago. And that's a real obstacle for him to deal with. So those are kind of my 2 points there. But for them to be a good shooting team, I think a lot of it's got to come with getting good looks. And I don't think they did that very well against Drake. And I think a lot of them being a good shooting team has to come with A.J. Hogarth and Jason Edwards getting their feet in the paint, to use the old stackism, and kicking it out and finding guys. And I think that's maybe more the recipe, Billy.
Yeah, I mean, he talked about it, I think, at his introductory press conference. He said, I'm not good enough to coach bad players, right? We've got to get good players into this program. And that's what it's going to take. They've got good players, but he knows in the SEC, you're going to have to land a 4-star here or there, maybe even a 5. They need that big fish, Joey. They haven't gotten it this recruiting cycle, but maybe if they make the tournament this year, that's enough for players to change their mind. But that's why this year is important. This year you can't overstate, how important this season is, because if you don't make the tournament this year, does that delay it? Does that delay it another year or so? I think there's probably a lot of recruits out there waiting for this program to make the tournament, show what they're made of. So it'll be interesting. But I think the non-conference games, how they finish out, will be interesting. Virginia Tech, not very good. They're really struggling. Tennessee Tech could sneak up. Austin Peay could sneak up as well. But I'm excited to just see what this team can do against SEC competition, because they showed against Nevada and Seton Hall that they could be an NCAA tournament team. They have that potential. Now let's see what happens.
I will say one other thing at the tournament, and Joey, you may push back on this if you want. The other teams from power conferences, Oklahoma State and Miami, I felt like we were a lot better than those two teams. And they're probably middle to lower part of their conference. So it kind of gave me a barometer, though we didn't face either one of those two squads.
I definitely thought they were the best Power 5 team there. I don't think there was any question about it.
Yeah.
Miami, I just can't believe how bad Miami was with the level of talent they have on their roster. I think that shows you that more than just what you have on paper matters. And I think Vanderbilt is playing better than maybe what they have on paper at this point, Chris.
Yeah, and but how much of that was based on you saying Miami was bad? You were there. Like I didn't see them in any of their games. Drake can make you look bad, I think. So I don't know how much of that is just Miami's not as good as we thought, or maybe that's just what Drake is going to do to some teams with a unique style of play that you're not going to see probably anywhere, at least in the SEC.
Yeah, I think who was it? I think it was the FAU coach when we talked to him. Basically said Drake makes you pay twice as much for every mistake you make, and I think you saw that on Sunday night. Vanderbilt did not play a terrible game. They certainly didn't play a good game, but Drake made it look a heck of a lot worse than it actually was. And I think Miami's got bigger issues than what it did against Drake, but man, that is a really well-coached team. I think Ben McCollum could be a Power 5 head coach in like a year or two if he wants the job. He had like 10 or 15 D1 job offers before he took the Drake one, so he's been a guy that's been on the D1 radar for a long time. He's a really good coach, and I think you saw that Drake is really good. And I don't think that this is anywhere near a Southern Miss or a Presbyterian or anything. This is probably going to be a quad 2. If they're unfortunate, it'll be a quad 3 loss. Maybe the MVC brings down Drake's net and everything, but Chris, I don't think that's any loss they have to be ashamed of. Where it could bite them is if it turns into a quad 3, though.
Well,
I feel like that's unlikely. I feel like Drake is going to be – I could see Drake being a top 50 team by season's end.
Yeah, and they just lost the DeVries, Tucker DeVries, and his dad, who was the head coach. They bring McCollum in, and he's look at them right now. As there's Oreo, but you know they're a winning program traditionally, Joey. I mean, I don't know how long they've been winning, but that showed to me that hey, you can bring a coach in, and because they don't have that Vanderbilt 10-year tax like you were talking about. They've got the 10 years of winning and even more. So I thought that definitely made a difference too.
Can I make one more point about Drake before we get off? Look at what they've done in the last 3 coaching hires. Just remarkable. Nico Medved, Darian DeVries, and now Ben McCollum. That is a heck of a 3-coach span, and I don't think Vanderbilt has much to be ashamed about for losing that game. Obviously, you can't consistently lose to MVC teams if you're an SEC team, but Luke, in that case, I think that's the excusable one.
Oh, yeah. And, Drake's been to, I think, 2 Final Fours. They lost to UCLA back in the 60s. I know that. Been a while back. But they have a program that you expect to be in the NIT or NCAA every year.
Gentlemen, I've got a radio appearance in about 15 minutes. I know we got a mailbag to get to, so Billy, I'll have you pull that up. As Billy is doing that, reminder, the mailbag is sponsored by Sutherland & Belk, the longest-running sponsor of Vandy Sports. Been a decade now. They are a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt in an accident, give Taylor Russell a call at 615-846-6200. Hope Joey wasn't hurt in an accident. He just disappeared here. He's back. Okay.
I have a radio hit right now, and I just pushed it back 15 minutes too.
Oh, got you. Okay.
Podcast.
Right. Anyway, call those guys if you need help, if you get hurt. Thank God Joey's not hurt. Guest line presented by Wobble, Bond Dickinson, and John Levin, who thanks the student athletes at Vanderbilt University for their dedication, effort, and hard work. Also by Yeaman Packaging Systems, leaders in end-of-line packaging automation. Billy, let's go mailbag. We'll go. You can give your answer to whatever's next. I have not seen what's in the mailbag. Then Luke, Joey, then I'll end if anything's left.
All right. Start with Puniverse. I think that's how you pronounce this name. Do we have enough left in the tank to beat Tennessee? I think they do, but that's different. I don't want that to mean that I think they will. Like I think Vanderbilt has enough left in the tank, but it's not a whole lot. I think Vanderbilt, you look at your gas tank and it says how many miles you've got left to drive. Vandy's probably at that 25-30 range. You can make it to your next destination, I think, but it's going to take everything else you've got, and maybe you won't have enough for that bowl game. Like that. That's kind of where I feel like they're at. Well, although the bowl game that they'll have, almost a month or a few weeks, whatever. until that game. So maybe that's not true. But look, I think they do, but I don't think it's a ton. That's kind of my answer.
Well, if I had this question at the end of the first quarter, I can tell you, because we'll be able to tell exactly who, you got the emotion of the game, what you can do on both sides. Tennessee obviously has to win to get the playoff. If we win, it's 365 days you have bragging rights. When you're 10% of 100% of Tennessee fans around, you're only 10% of Vandy fans. I think that carries you only so far, the emotion of that. And after the first quarter, if we still got juice going into that second quarter and we're in a one-score game, I feel pretty good about it. But if they come out and punch us in the mouth and score 14 quick over the top, or Sampson gets a long 80-yard run or something, it could be a long day.
Yeah, I do think there is enough in the tank to where if they play a perfect game, if sparked by a few turnovers or a couple long downfield passing plays, they got a chance. But I think Tennessee's probably got more in the tank right now, and I think it's going to be an uphill battle to be able to win that. I think Captain Obvious, right? But I do think this team is made up of enough stuff to where they do have a chance, and I wouldn't completely write them off. But, Chris, it's going to be pretty difficult.
Yeah. I mean, they have done a phenomenal job of staying close. Again, to reiterate what I said earlier in the year, the fact that they are having a puncher's chance with 5 minutes left in the game to beat just about everybody other than South Carolina is amazing. But stuff's got to go right. They've got to continue to walk this tightrope of not turning it over, which they're doing a great job. But the other thing that's kind of gone away, guys, early in the year when they were getting wins, they were getting turnovers. They got that pick six from Fontenette. That's kind of gone away. They haven't. I feel like they haven't had many sacks the last 3 or 4 games. They've got to jump up and make some plays. They've got to dial up a couple of things like they dialed up in the LSU game where they hit the big plays to Skinner. They've got to walk a very thin line in order to win this game. That's going to include – the difference is they're not beating LSU but because there was a turnover or two in there against Alabama and some other games they won earlier, Virginia Tech, that hasn't been there lately. So it's got to be continue to do all the things that you do well. Don't make mistakes. Don't get timely penalties. And make some stuff happen that you haven't been lately.
Second part of his question, can we beat them if we don't win the turnover battle by 2?
No. Ooh.
Do you have to win it by 2?
Let me answer that. I think maybe not, because their special teams has been so good. I mean, like pinning a team on the 2 with a punt is
almost a turnover.
Yeah, right. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
But I don't think you win if you're 0.
And you almost need it to be a pick six or a fumble a fumble recovery that gets you back inside the red zone. But you even saw against South Carolina, had that turnover, and then they turned it right back over. Certainly can't have that.
Yeah.
Okay, this is more of an offseason type question, VA72, and this will wrap us up here. What positions are top priority for next year's football team? I mean, you got to say quarterback, right? We're going off the assumption that Pavia won't be back. We don't know that, but I mean, quarterback, obviously. Offensive line, like you talked about earlier, Luke. Yeah, specifically the tackles. I think there could be some fluctuation there. The safeties, Derrick Wright and CJ Taylor. I mean, those 2 guys won't be back. Although you do like what you have behind them, but receiver guys. I mean, you need a couple of stud receivers to come in here that can make plays. You saw what LSU had. That made a huge difference. Look, I think receiver might be the biggest. I mean, outside quarterback, of course, but that's still in flux right now.
Yeah, I would say depth on the offensive line for sure. We got to, we lose all 5 of these guys, or at least 4 of them.
Yeah.
Hopefully Grayson Morgan can be helped here, but I agree there in receiver. And again, making a decision on who the quarterback's going to be, whether it's a portal guy, Nate Johnson, or in my opinion, Jeremy St. Hilaire is a star waiting to happen. That's my take on that.
I think quarterback is a really interesting one. I I don't know if I love what Pavia has to stand on in the lawsuit, and we'll get into that another time. But I think quarterback is probably, if they don't get Pavia back, and even if they do get Pavia back, where they're going to have to allocate a lot of their resources. And I think they'll have enough left to go around, but I also think they're going to have a lot of holes to fill. I think you're banking on Cole Spence taking a leap at tight end next year, so you don't have to allocate a ton there. At running back, I think you're fine, but you probably benefit from adding a back. I thought they should have added one last offseason to kind of complement Newberry and Alexander. Receiver, I think is maybe even less of a desire for me than other positions just because of the way they use receiver. But offensive line, I think, has to be completely overhauled. The defensive line, I think they need a real stud there, and I think it's going to be easier said than done to get. But they need maybe 2 Corday Sidners or one guy who can be a game changer. The corner they're going to need to get better at, and then safety is going to be a thing too. So they're going to have a lot of holes to fill this offseason, but I think their NIL is in a good enough place to where they could have a strong offseason. They could position themselves, but it's certainly not going to be, well, they won 6 games, so they're naturally going to take a huge leap, because I think they're going to have a lot of holes to fill as a result of that 6-win season, or maybe even a 7-win season if Saturday goes well, Chris.
Yeah, position by position. Quarterback, they're either going to need no help or a ton of help, depending on how the court case goes. Although the St. Hilaire thing, that's the wild card. And who knows, maybe Nate Johnson too. But I think you get Diego back, that's one thing you can check off if it happens. Running back, I think they need a lot of help. Either that or much better help than they had, if that's what the issue is. I think receiver, I think they're in a decent place, not a great place, but that's helped by the fact that they don't throw as much and have as many plays. But I think, Sherrill is a nice start, but you are going to need some help. Tight end, losing Sowers is going to hurt. I do think Spence is capable. I know people think we're crazy on that, but we've seen it enough in practice. Offensive line, need a lot of help. Defensive line, need help. Need to get Wood another year if they can. Linebacker, I feel like they're in a pretty decent spot with linebacker. Maybe need Langston Patterson healthier, but he and Longwell are certainly capable, and you've got a little depth. In corner, I've been surprised. Hyde and Lackey played really well, and there's some guys behind them. Safety, they're going to lose potentially a ton with the Ricky and C.J. Taylor, so you're going to need some spot. The Fontenette is maybe an All-American, so you got to keep him. In kicker, you're in terrific shape. And is this Mirko's last year?
Yes.
Yeah.
You're starting to turn in a little bit of a
special teams factory.
Yeah. That's maybe a little strong. It's been 1 year that they've been really good in all 3. Height's a good punt returner, but I mean they've had two great. What did I do?
Special teams factory.
Well, I was actually thinking it too, and then I thought that's probably a little strong. Given it's just been.
Look, ever since year 1, like when they were 2-10, I think it was Bulovas. Like he was drilling. He had a game winner against UConn, and they had to get. Yeah, Hayball. Like really, since Clark's been there. Now coverage units have been porous at times.
That's where I would hold back. But you are onto something. They have found some things that have really worked. They've been good at punting. Insert your joke there, But in that Brock Taylor's a really good kicker, guys.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one place where I feel like they've tapped into something that's and they lose the guy that they thought was maybe the best special teams coach in the country, and they got better. So anyway.
Well, coverage is going to be huge. Boo Carter is really explode. I could see him impacting this game for Tennessee. And their coverage has been better. And Luke, I've been impressed. You saw Bryce Cowan blow up, the LSU kick return there. So that's going to be massive. The second part of this question, though, how does Clark Lee primarily intend to find these players? High school recruiting or portal? I think portal. Yes. I mean, Jack Elliott the quarterback. Jack Elliott is a recruit I think they really like. People are calling him the next Pavia. But, I mean, outside of him, these are going to be portal guys.
Yeah, I agree. More portal than anything.
I mean, that's how you build it quickly, right? They're going to have to reload a lot of position groups to be ready to go next year, and the portal is the answer there. Clark talked about how they could maybe take 10 to 20 again, and I think that number might lean closer to 20 again, Chris.
I'd hate to be. Well, no, it wouldn't. The pay's a lot better. But headaches as a college football coach right now are just, it's unbelievable. And how stupid is the NCAA that we're still here 4 years into this and we don't have clear answers?
I can't even speak to it. Awful.
Higher ed and government are the maybe the two most worst run organizations in America, and those fields.
Billy, turn your gain up. I can't hear you clear.
That's always the fix, Billy.
All right, if you say so.
All right, gentlemen, I'm going to get out of here because I've got a radio thing to do. Thank you, guys. I'm blessed to have all of you. We're all friends off camera too, and off podcast, which is nice. But just thrilled to have all of you guys here. That's helped me hold it together in a time where my life is busier than it's ever been by a lot. But anyway, thank you to our audience for listening. Thank you to our sponsors. For Billy Derrick, Luke Wyatt, and Joey Dwyer, I'm Chris Lee. You've been watching and listening to the Vandy Sports Podcast, which is part of the 440 Sports Network.